My name is Alex Mercer, and you're listening to a special transmission from an undisclosed emergency studio. What you're about to hear is an account gathered from scattered witnesses, aviation personnel, and government leaks, an attempt to document the moment the world looked up and found nothing but silence staring back. It was the morning when every familiar sound of the sky, the low thrum of commercial engines, the distant hum of cruising jets, the rhythmic ascent and descent of global flight, vanished without warning. People in cities described it as a kind of unsettling quiet, a hush that felt imposed rather than natural. Airports worldwide received identical encrypted directives, marked with military priority codes that even senior air traffic controllers claimed they'd never seen before. Within minutes, runway lights went dark, control towers were locked down, and the global aviation clock stopped ticking. This broadcast aims to piece together the threads of that day, the day the skies went silent. Across the world, planes already in the air became sudden refugees in their own atmosphere. Pilots reported being forced from routine flight paths by unseen digital hands, autopilot overrides, encrypted redirects, and tower commands issued from unknown sources. Some flights were diverted to remote military strips, others to forgotten Cold War-era airfields that still bore cracked concrete and rusted hangars. Travelers stepped out of cabins expecting explanations and received none. Only the sight of soldiers with muted insignias directing them into makeshift shelters. Families watched their vacations dissolve into containment zones. Business travelers found themselves stranded on windswept runways with no cell signal, no news, and no idea why the skies had suddenly become forbidden territory. It was the first universal grounding of the modern age, but it was carried out with a precision and coordination no single nation admitted to ordering. And so people did what humans always do when information is withheld. They speculated, they feared, and they waited. Then the anomalies began. Radar operators, civilian and military, started reporting objects moving in coordinated formations, slipping across airspace at speeds that short-circuited every known flight model. At first, a dozen, then dozens more. By dawn in Europe, the count had climbed into the hundreds. Some formations resembled geometric patterns. Others behaved like drifting constellations with intention behind their motion. Their signatures were unlike aircraft, drones, or weather phenomena. They did not broadcast transponders. They changed direction without deceleration. They appeared and vanished as though the sky itself had shuttered open and closed around them. Yet no alarms were issued to the public. Nations simply activated anti-air systems in eerie synchrony, locking the world's attention downward instead of upward. It was as if the governments of Earth had been waiting, not reacting, but preparing for this exact scenario. By the afternoon of that same day, entire continents were placed under unexplained no-fly orders. Satellite footage, what little has been leaked, shows jet fighters grounded nose to tarmac in rows, missile batteries rotating skyward, and naval carriers adjusting into defensive formations along coastlines. Civilian space agencies reported temporary communication losses, while private aerospace companies were instructed to suspend all launches until further notice. To the everyday citizen, the visible world seemed unchanged. People still walked dogs, traffic lights still blinked, coffee shops still opened their doors. But there was tension in the air, a taut wire stretched across nations. Something had moved into Earth's airspace, something that commanded enough fear, or awe, or uncertainty, that every major government responded in perfect unspoken alignment. The silence in the sky became not just quiet, but oppressive, like a held breath that no one dared release. Hours later, encrypted channels between world militaries surged with traffic. Metadata spikes, silent handshakes, bursts of quantum-scrambled messages. Yet the public received nothing. No announcement, no explanation, no reassurance. Scientists who attempted to speak publicly were cut off mid-interview, their feeds interrupted by technical difficulties. Amateur radio operators recorded strange bursts of harmonic tones sweeping across frequencies unused since the Cold War. And still, the sky remained empty except for the unidentified formations tracked only by radar. Humanity found itself grounded not just physically, but informationally, denied the story unfolding above its own atmosphere. It became clear that whatever had triggered this shutdown was not a simple threat, nor an accident, nor a test. It was an event that the world governments had unanimously decided the public was not prepared to face. This has been Alex Mercer. And though the skies remain silent tonight, the truth beneath that silence grows louder with every unanswered question. What moved across our airspace that day? Why did every nation respond as if following a single unspoken command? And what, if anything, is still up there now, beyond our sight, yet well within our fear? Until someone decides to tell the world the truth, or until whatever arrived makes itself known, we will continue transmitting, documenting, and collecting every scrap of testimony we can. Because the silence above us is not peace. It is preparation. And somewhere, just beyond the reach of human eyes, something is waiting. This is Alex Mercer, returning to the airwaves with another transmission in our ongoing chronicle of the events now known as the silence sequence. What unfolded the day after the skies went quiet has been dissected by analysts, denied by officials, and buried under layers of classification thicker than the hull of any orbital craft. But the fragments we've gathered paint a picture as chilling as it is undeniable. It began with an assault not on cities, not on nations, not even on the people who populate the Earth. The attack struck the very infrastructure that binds humanity's understanding of time, space, and global coordination. At precisely 4:17 UTC, military satellites orbiting the planet reported a synchronized flash, an energy pulse of unknown composition, moving through orbit like a ripple across glass. For 3 seconds, the instruments recorded values beyond the scale of their calibration, and then, one by one, the eyes of the world went blind. Within minutes of the pulse, communication satellites began to fail in cascading silence. Entire constellations flickered off the digital map, leaving engineers staring at blank telemetry panels. GPS units, once the backbone of global navigation, drifted wildly, reporting impossible coordinates, reversed polar alignments, even instantaneous teleportations of thousands of kilometers. Civilian pilots, already grounded from the previous day's global airspace lockdown, reported their onboard systems spinning like compasses in a magnetic storm. The attack did not strike soil or structures. It struck the scaffolding of modern civilization, the invisible skyways that transmit weather data, financial transactions, encrypted commands, and global positioning. It was a blow aimed squarely at humanity's ability to coordinate, to communicate, to comprehend. By morning, half the planet found itself digitally severed from the other half, suspended in a kind of high-tech isolation. Encrypted military channels around the world collapsed into silence. Strategic command centers, designed to operate even under nuclear siege, found their satellite relays dead, their secure lines jammed with meaningless static. Generals sat in war rooms listening to empty frequencies, unable to verify if their own assets were still functioning. Nations that prided themselves on redundancies discovered that their backups had backups, but all of them depended on the same orbital infrastructure now rendered inert. For the first time since the dawn of modern warfare, the playing field had been leveled in a single, devastating stroke. No one could see, no one could signal, no one could command. And in that vacuum, mistrust began to metastasize. Who had fired the first shot? Who had the capability? Who had the motive? And most critically, if the strike was not human, whose war had humanity just been dragged into? Diplomatic channels went into overdrive. Intelligence agencies submitted urgent reports pointing fingers at the nations they distrusted for decades. Theories flooded into war rooms faster than they could be dismissed. A rogue state with a clandestine weapon, a multinational cyber-terrorist collective, a catastrophic solar event disguised as an attack, or, whispered only behind closed doors, something not born on Earth. But no nation claimed responsibility, and the absence of pride, victory, or propaganda only deepened the alarm. Historically, the first to strike is the first to gloat, even if only through coded arrogance. Yet this attack came with the cold precision of a scalpel and the silence of a ghost. In a world where every action is usually claimed, branded, or politicized, this event stood alone, anonymous, coordinated, and devastating. It was a message written across orbit with no signature at the bottom. With communications fractured and suspicions rising, the world found itself on the brink of misunderstanding magnified into catastrophe. Military commanders, cut off from higher authority, were forced to make decisions without confirmation or oversight. Patrols moved closer to borders. Nuclear submarines surfaced to receive radio instructions that never arrived. Radar stations, still glitching from the previous day's anomalies, reported phantom aircraft and impossible trajectories. In this chaotic haze, the wrong assumption could have ignited a global chain reaction, a war sparked not by malice but by misinterpretation, and perhaps that was the intention. Whoever, or whatever, initiated the strike did not need to fire on cities. They only had to extinguish the light of coordination and let the world stumble blindly toward its own destruction. The greatest weapon is not force, it is confusion. This is Alex Mercer, and as I speak these words, the sky remains contested territory, silent, fractured, and full of questions humanity has never before needed to ask. The first strike was not aimed at armies or citizens. It was aimed at understanding itself. And somewhere above the Earth, beyond the reach of our ruined satellites, something observes a planet unsure whether it is under attack or under evaluation. Our next transmission will continue to unravel this crisis. But until then, remember, the most dangerous wars are the ones where no one knows who the enemy is. This is Alex Mercer, transmitting once again through fractured channels and improvised equipment. What began as a silent sky and an unseen strike has now spilled violently onto the ground. The third event in this escalating global unraveling did not occur in orbit, nor did it manifest in the controlled corridors of government bunkers. It ignited along a border that has been a pressure point for generations. A region steeped in unresolved disputes, cultural fractures, and political fault lines. For decades it simmered, threatening to boil but never quite crossing the threshold. That changed overnight. Surveillance drones, those few still operational after the orbital blackout, captured footage of massive troop movements stretching for miles. Columns of armored vehicles, mechanized divisions, artillery units, and infantry marching in tight formations under cover of darkness. The footage, streamed briefly before satellites finally failed, revealed an unmistakable truth. Something was mobilizing, something deliberate and overwhelming. By sunrise, government representatives from both nations were on live feeds, denying involvement with synchronized conviction. Their statements were eerily similar: claims of forged footage, digital manipulation, and false flag strategies intended to provoke escalation. Yet even as these words were spoken, civilian live streams on the ground painted a different story. People living in the villages that border the contested region filmed convoys rolling past their farmlands, engines rumbling like an approaching storm. They captured the metallic glint of armor plates under moonlight, the churn of earth beneath treads, and the unmistakable silhouettes of missile carriers moving with grim purpose. If this was deception, it was deception performed with real vehicles and real soldiers, marching beneath a banner that no one officially recognized. And so the world found itself locked between denial and undeniable truth, with no trustworthy signal left to clarify the confusion. By mid-afternoon, the distant thump of artillery began. At first it was sporadic. One blast, then silence, then another. But soon the rhythm became relentless, a steady heartbeat of conflict pulsing across the region. Civilians fled in every direction, some crossing rivers on foot, others taking mountain paths in hopes of avoiding the growing firestorms. The sky above the border filled with smoke plumes rising like dark pillars, obscuring the horizon. Peacekeeping forces stationed nearby attempted to move in and mediate, but their communications were still compromised from the orbital strike. Misinterpreting movements and unable to confirm orders, they found themselves wedged between two advancing armies that saw every unknown vehicle as a potential threat. What began as a mission of de-escalation turned into a frantic retreat as shells exploded around them, forcing them to abandon equipment and seek shelter in bunkers older than the nations themselves. As the conflict intensified, both sides continued to insist the other had launched an unprovoked offensive. Officials accused each other of staging the troop movements for propaganda, of fabricating evidence to justify aggression, of exploiting the global communication blackout to seize territory while the world was distracted. But among analysts, those few still able to compare surviving data, the truth grew more elusive. The troop formations did not match either nation's known military structure. Armor types were mismatched. Uniform insignias were inconsistent or missing entirely. Some units advanced with chilling precision. Others moved in unpredictable swarms. It was as if someone, or something, had assembled an invasion force from parts of both armies, stitched together from familiarity and anomaly alike. Whether this was deliberate mimicry, sabotage, or something far stranger remained unclear. What was clear is that the border had ceased to be a line on a map. It had become a wound. When the first major city near the border fell silent, its power grid collapsing, its roads choked by fleeing civilians, the world realized the ignition point had been reached. In normal times, a conflict like this would have drawn immediate global intervention. But these were not normal times. With satellites blind, with nations wary and isolated, and with trust evaporating faster than the smoke rising from burning outposts, the international community found itself paralyzed. Some governments elevated their militaries to full alert. Others fortified their borders. A few, panicked by radar phantoms and misinterpreted movements, moved strategic assets into positions from which they could not easily retreat. And so the border dispute, long a smoldering ember, became the spark that fell onto a world drenched in fear. What should have remained a regional clash mutated into the cornerstone of a conflict that threaten to consume far more than the land between two nations. This is Alex Mercer, signing off for now. But listen closely. Conflicts do not erupt in isolation, especially not now. When borders break in a world already blinded and confused, the consequences ripple outward with tidal force. The silence in the sky, the strike on orbit, and now the eruption on the ground. These events form a chain, and chains, once pulled tight, tend to snap. As always, we will continue reporting as long as there is power in these transmitters and breath in our lungs. But with each passing hour, the world slides further into a conflict without a name, without a clear enemy, and without a path back. This is Alex Mercer, broadcasting through what remains of our patched-together relay network. Tonight, I bring you an account of the moment the world crossed from fear into chaos, an hour that many are now calling the longest night. The events of that night were not confined to a single nation or continent. They erupted everywhere, almost simultaneously, as though some unseen conductor had lifted a baton and directed catastrophe to strike in perfect, lethal rhythm. At precisely 22:14 local time across multiple time zones, critical infrastructure facilities, power plants, hydroelectric stations, fusion reactors, and regional grids experienced sudden internal detonations, not attacks from above, not missile strikes. These explosions originated inside the facilities themselves, blooming outward like metal flowers rupturing from hidden seeds. Cities watched their horizons flare with impossible brightness as entire plants reduced themselves to expanding spheres of fire. Blackouts followed, plunging millions into darkness, leaving only the glow of distant burns to light the sky. Moments after the energy grid began unraveling, major transportation arteries buckled across the world. Surveillance feeds, those few that hadn't been scrambled by the orbital strike, captured the surreal sight of bridges collapsing in perfect synchronicity. These weren't old structures weakened by time. Many were reinforced, over-engineered marvels designed to withstand centuries of use and natural disasters. Yet on this night, they snapped like brittle bones. Support cables sheared apart as if surgically cut. Pillars crumbled in straight vertical falls, precisely controlled, as though the structures had been prepared for demolition long before the idea of sabotage entered anyone's mind. Highways vanished into chasms. Coastal suspension bridges folded inward, dropping stunned drivers into black water. Emergency responders, still scrambling to understand the first explosions, suddenly found themselves dealing with hundreds of disconnected islands of asphalt and metal. It was as if the planet itself had been sectioned off, piece by piece, into isolated pockets by the hands of a master engineer. Then the coastlines lit up. Naval bases across several nations erupted into synchronized infernos. Ammunition depots, dry docks, missile silos, and fuel reserves detonated in staggering cascades, creating fire pillars visible from neighboring cities. Witnesses described the night sky glowing orange-red, flickering like a furnace door left open. Naval ships, still anchored, still fueled, still vulnerable, were torn apart at the waterline, capsizing in harbors now boiling with fire. Jets that had been grounded since the first days of the crisis were buried under raining debris. The precision was too perfect, too orchestrated for coincidence. Every detonation targeted something crucial: strategic weapons, supply chains, communication hubs. In a single hour, nations lost decades of military strength, their fleets reduced to burning silhouettes against the dark horizon. When investigators finally reached the ruins, after the heat subsided, after the secondary explosions ended, they found something far more terrifying than sabotage. They uncovered evidence that the explosives had not been planted recently. They had been installed years ago, woven into the structures like dormant parasites. Some were embedded in foundations poured after new construction projects. Others were hidden inside access tunnels sealed since their ceremonial openings. Many were placed at exact pressure points only engineers with classified clearance would know. It became horrifyingly clear that the detonations were not improvised acts of terror, but the culmination of a long, patient infiltration. The bombs had been waiting for activation codes, waiting for a global moment of weakness, waiting for a signal triggered only after the skies had gone silent and nations had turned against each other. Someone had been preparing for this night long before the world realized a war had even begun. As the scale of the coordinated destruction became apparent, panic rippled through the remaining connected networks. Governments accused each other of sleeper operations. Intelligence agencies accused domestic traitors. Conspiracies metastasized through the few channels still functioning. But a paradox emerged, one that deepened the terror. The bombs were placed too broadly, too precisely, and over too many years to have been installed by any single nation. No unified signature, no shared technology, no ideological consistency. It was as if the installations were performed by separate hands following the same blueprint, a blueprint no one had ever seen or authorized. Some explosives were manufactured decades apart, yet wired with similar triggers. Others used materials no longer in production, suggesting infiltration stretching beyond political eras, beyond generational timelines. The question, whispered now across darkened cities and emergency bunkers, was not who did this, but rather how long have they been preparing for it. This is Alex Mercer, ending this broadcast as night continues to burn across continents. The silent sky was the warning. The orbital strike was the opening shot. The border conflict was the spark, but the night of simultaneous explosions, that was the moment humanity realized the enemy was neither foreign nor familiar. It was invisible, patient, calculated, and terrifyingly thorough. As always, I will continue transmitting as long as these frequencies remain untouched. But hear me clearly. Someone has been planning this for years, perhaps decades, waiting for the world to be blind, fractured, and afraid. Tonight, the final piece of their long game was set into motion. This is Alex Mercer, transmitting once again from a station that barely holds together with each passing hour. What unfolded today may go down as the moment humanity stumbled from crisis into the edge of true, irreversible war. It began not with an explosion or an attack, but with a voice, calm, clipped, undeniably military, leaking onto every global frequency at once. For 43 seconds, the world heard a transmission that was never meant for human ears outside a sealed command bunker. A broadcast that cut through dead satellites, dead grids, and dead diplomacy like a razor through paper. The message was brief, clinical, and chilling. A list of coordinates, a schedule, a sequence of actions labeled Phase 1, and an unmistakable directive: initiate at dawn. No nation claimed ownership. No military acknowledged the voice. And for the first time since the skies went silent, humanity listened collectively, breath held, knowing that the next sunrise might be the last. During those 43 seconds, analysts scrambled, some with functioning equipment, others using repurposed consumer tech to geolocate the coordinates mentioned in the leak. What they discovered sparked a panic unlike anything seen in generations. The targets were spread across continents, strategic airfields, missile silos, command centers still operating on backup power, deep-sea communication relays, and even civilian infrastructure hubs that had survived the previous night of detonations. This wasn't a surgical strike plan. It was a blueprint for crippling the remnants of global stability. Anyone listening in real time felt the shift immediately. The sense that the world was no longer reacting to a slow-moving crisis, but standing on the edge of a cliff, shoved forward by an unseen hand. The plan was designed to overwhelm, to finish the dismantling of global coordination, to ensure that no nation had the strength to recover. What made the broadcast truly terrifying wasn't just the targets, it was the tone. The speaker was calm, methodical, and completely unshaken, as though announcing a scheduled training exercise rather than orchestrating a global first strike. There was no urgency, no emotion, no context. Just that cold directive: initiate phase 1. Then the broadcast cut, not fading but severed mid-syllable, as if someone had torn a wire from the heart of the transmission. The world sat in silence for several seconds afterward, the kind of silence that feels like standing in the eye of a storm, too still, too intentional, too brief. And then the panic began. Governments scrambled to their command bunkers. Civilian networks collapsed under the weight of simultaneous alerts. People flooded streets, not knowing whether to run, hide, or simply listen for sirens that might signal the beginning of an attack already in motion. What followed was chaos, not because war had started, but because no one knew if it had. Some nations immediately activated their retaliation protocols, interpreting the broadcast as confirmation that they were moments away from a coordinated strike. Their militaries, blind from satellite loss and confused by radar anomalies, operated on worst-case assumptions. Missile crews were placed on red alert. Nuclear submarines received scrambled instructions that commanders interpreted as authorization to prepare launch procedures. Meanwhile, other nations insisted the broadcast was a fabrication, a provocation engineered to trigger exactly that type of overreaction. They argued it was a false flag, a psychological weapon meant to ignite mistrust and fear. But in a world severed from reliable communication, accusation became indistinguishable from truth. Every government believed they were being manipulated by someone: rival powers, internal factions, or perhaps the same shadow that had orchestrated the detonations and troop movements. In the absence of certainty, paranoia became global policy. Investigation into the source of the broadcast has only deepened the mystery. Experts who managed to analyze the signal's residue before systems crashed again reported that it did not match any known military encryption. Some fragments resembled legacy codes from decades-old alliances. Others looked like modern quantum cipher signatures. A few were so foreign in structure that analysts questioned whether they were encrypted at all or simply incomprehensible. Yet the voice, strangely, was human, unmistakably so. This has led to the most unsettling theory of all: that the broadcast was not created by one nation or faction, but assembled from pieces of many, a composite transmission stitched together using knowledge no single group should possess. A message designed not to inform a real military, but to force the world to decide whether a war had already begun. And once that choice is made, there is no turning back. This is Alex Mercer. And tonight, the world does not wait for explosions or invasions. It waits for dawn. Somewhere, someone wants nations to act, not because the order is real, but because the fear of it is. A real strike doesn't need to be launched if belief alone can trigger retaliation. And as long as the question remains, was the broadcast authentic? The world stands poised on the sharpest edge of history. I will continue transmitting. As long as these frequencies remain mine, I will keep documenting the unraveling of this unseen war. But make no mistake, the next broadcast humanity hears might not be a leak. It might be the beginning. This is Alex Mercer, returning to the airwaves as the world's final bridges of diplomacy crumble into dust. For weeks now, leaders have gathered in emergency summits, some in fortified conference halls, others in hastily repurposed underground shelters, trying desperately to stitch together a semblance of peace from the shredded remains of trust. These summits were once symbols of unity, stages where the world's most powerful voices sought resolution. But in this new era of silence, sabotage, and suspicion, they became pressure chambers waiting to rupture. From the first meeting to the last, the atmosphere grew more toxic, as if every seat at the negotiation table had been wired with its own invisible explosives. Delegates no longer arrived seeking compromise. They arrived armed with accusations, their words sharp enough to draw blood. And by the end, diplomacy didn't merely fail, it collapsed under its own weight. The earliest sessions still carried a fragile hope, though that hope was quickly poisoned by mistranslations. Some accidental, others suspiciously precise in their timing. A phrase meant to reassure was interpreted as a threat. A statement of neutrality was twisted into declaration of alignment. Even the most seasoned interpreters found themselves unable to guarantee accuracy, their devices disrupted by lingering communication interference, their human judgment corroded by relentless pressure. Every misunderstanding triggered escalation, raised voices, pointed fingers, demands for retractions, and threats of withdrawal. Entire delegations stormed out over grammar, syntax, or what they later insisted were intentional provocations. The more the world tried to speak, the less it understood itself. Then the leaks began. Private side conversations, whispered in hallways, murmured in translation booths, exchanged over supposedly secure channels, mysteriously emerged on public networks. These weren't random snippets, but carefully curated fragments, spliced together to maximize outrage. A casual remark, stripped of context, became an insult. A diplomatic strategy discussion became a betrayal. A moment of frustration became an international threat. Soon, every delegate wondered if their own allies were recording them. Every alliance felt perforated. Trust, once fragile, now shattered completely. When delegates looked around the negotiation table, they no longer saw partners. They saw spies. They saw traitors. They saw enemies. And in that kind of room, peace has no oxygen to breathe. As the summits dragged on, alliances began to fracture like ice in spring melt. Long-standing partnerships faltered under suspicion. Cooperative treaties dissolved in real time. Emergency coalitions formed in panic during the earliest days of the crisis, splintered as their members accused one another of sabotage, misinformation, and hidden agendas. Some nations shifted sides mid-meeting. Others withdrew completely, retreating behind their borders and locking their communications to the outside world. The diplomatic map, once complicated but comprehensible, became a chaotic sprawl of shifting loyalties. It wasn't a global community anymore. It was a collection of isolated states bracing for the worst. The last summit was meant to be the turning point, a final desperate attempt to pull humanity back from the brink. Instead, it became the funeral for global diplomacy. Delegates arrived exhausted, suspicious, and visibly afraid. No one trusted the translation systems. No one trusted the documents handed to them. no one trusted the promises made across the table. Voices rose, fists slammed, accusations flew like shrapnel. Some argued for cooperation, their pleas drowned out by those convinced that peace was a trap. One by one, delegation heads stood, collected their papers, and walked out. The sound of chairs scraping across the floor echoed like the grinding of tectonic plates. Microphones continued broadcasting the empty room, capturing nothing but the hum of abandoned machinery. Lights flickered. The screens at the front displayed frozen, meaningless data. And in that emptiness, the world understood. Diplomacy was not dying. It was already dead. This is Alex Mercer, and today humanity crossed a line it cannot uncross. With diplomacy gone, there is no more illusion of safety, no treaties to appeal to, no table left to sit at. The world's leaders didn't just fail to prevent war, they confirmed it. What remains now is not debate, not negotiation, but inevitability. A conflict that no one wanted, yet everyone accelerated. A future shaped not by agreements, but by fear. And as nations retreat into their silos, caves, and bunkers, preparing for whatever comes next, I will remain here, documenting the pieces as they fall. Because when the last voices leave the room, someone must still be listening. This is Alex Mercer, broadcasting through what remains of a network that feels older every hour, slower, glitching, frayed at its digital edges. Today marks the first official day of what analysts are calling the cyber winter, a technological collapse without precedent. It began not with explosions or military movements, but with silence, a sudden, suffocating absence of numbers on screens where trillions once flowed. In less than an hour, the world's most secure systems buckled. Not just one bank, not one exchange, but all of them, simultaneously, as if someone or something pulled a single thread and the entire global fabric unraveled. And now, with our digital infrastructure freezing around us, we are left to face a truth we've denied for decades. Our world was never built to withstand a failure at this scale. It began at 4:12 UTC. Bank accounts blinked to zero or disappeared entirely. Not drained, deleted. Global trading floors from New York to Shanghai flashed a single word where market data should have been: error. Automated systems seized, then rebooted, then crashed again. Emergency protocols attempted to restore order, but the algorithms meant to stabilize the system behaved like they were trying to escape it. People stared at blank screens displaying fortunes turned to dust, while governments declared temporary technical disruption that fooled no one. The financial arteries of civilization constricted, then collapsed, and the world felt its heartbeat stutter. Then came the facilities, the ones we were told could never go dark. Nuclear plants worldwide reported cascading system failures, their digital oversight suddenly blind. Reactors switched to manual override, a phrase that once inspired confidence but now conjured panic. Operators worked by analog gauges and emergency checklists printed decades ago, their screens flickering with corrupted data that made no sense. Power grids shuddered. Communication towers went offline. In some regions, lights flickered like dying stars. In others, they simply went out. And all the while, governments assured citizens that the situation was under control. But the hum of a reactor in manual mode tells its own story, one of vulnerability we were never meant to see. Cybersecurity experts, what few remain reachable, speak in tones usually reserved for natural disasters or incoming asteroids. The malware spreading through global systems doesn't match known architectures. It shifts, adapts, mutates. Firewalls slow it, but can't contain it. Patches dissolve under its pressure. Some believe it's self-learning. Some believe it's pre-programmed to evolve. Others whisper theories that border on science fiction. Whatever its origin, it moves with purpose. Crawling across networks at speeds not measured in bandwidth, but in intention. It slips through encrypted channels designed to be impenetrable. It erases logs as it travels, leaving only fragments, glitches like digital footprints pressed into melting snow. In the vacuum of answers, accusations erupted. Governments blamed rival nations. Intelligence agencies leaked unverified theories. Military analysts pointed fingers at familiar enemies, unfamiliar groups, or entirely new entities. Statements oscillated between denial, outrage, and thinly veiled threats. The world's most powerful nations began drafting cyber retaliation strategies against adversaries they couldn't confirm. It's the old dance of geopolitics, now performed on frozen circuitry. But behind every accusation lies a quiet dread. No one is certain that any nation is responsible. And if it wasn't a nation, then humanity may not be fighting each other, but fighting something it doesn't understand. When the satellites faltered, everything changed. Weather data became inconsistent. GPS networks stuttered, then drifted miles off target. Mapping systems snapped to impossible coordinates. Some satellites transmitted corrupted streams, nonsense strings and distorted telemetry that looked less like data and more like digital delirium. The world relies on these silent machines for far more than navigation. They are the skeleton of global communication, commerce, and security. And now, their bones are cracking. Air travel slowed. Shipping veered dangerously off course. Intelligence networks lost vision. And the sky, once filled with silent order, now speaks in static. This is Alex Mercer. Tonight, we stand on the threshold of a technological ice age, one colder and more absolute than any winter the natural world has ever delivered. The digital world we built, our second skin, our global nervous system, has gone numb, sluggish, failing. And in this creeping frost, humanity is left exposed. Without our satellites, our networks, our automation, our data, we are no longer the hyper-connected civilization we believed ourselves to be. We are something older, something more fragile. And as the world searches for answers, human, mechanical, or otherwise, I will continue broadcasting as long as these aging circuits allow. Because in the cyber winter, the greatest resource left is not data, it's truth. And even truth is freezing. This is Alex Mercer, coming to you through a frequency that grows shakier by the hour. If you're hearing this broadcast, you've likely seen the footage already. The streak of light carving across a dawn sky, the sonic boom rattling windows hundreds of miles away, and the plume that rose over one of the world's largest cities, like the exhale of a sleeping giant awakened too abruptly. Today will be remembered as the morning everything shifted. Not because a missile hit a city, tragic as that is, but because the missile didn't belong to anyone. Not officially, not technologically, not even logically. And that simple impossibility has detonated something far larger than the blast itself. Global certainty. The impact occurred at 6:23 local time. Sirens screamed, buildings trembled, shockwaves tore through the streets like invisible claws. Emergency broadcasts immediately declared an attack. Air defense systems scrambled to identify additional threats but found none. Just one missile. One uninvited messenger announcing a new phase of the world's unraveling. But when analysts traced its trajectory, the confusion began. The launch coordinates landed squarely in a region bristling with surveillance. Yet every camera, every radar, every early warning system recorded something they shouldn't have. A launch signature that matched no known design. The missile didn't resemble Western systems, nor Eastern, nor any black-budget prototype whispered about by insiders. It was, in every technical sense, foreign to human engineering. Within 30 minutes, global leaders stepped in front of microphones. One after another, they denied involvement with an urgency that felt closer to fear than diplomacy. Governments that rarely speak to each other suddenly became united, if only in panic. No nation wanted ownership of what had just happened. No nation wanted to become the spark of an accidental world war. Yet no nation was willing to believe the others. Intelligence agencies issued statements filled with jargon-heavy evasions. Military officials skirted around direct answers, and when pressed about the unique launch signature, they offered a chilling reply. "We are investigating anomalies." Anomalies. A word usually reserved for astrophysics, not weapons. As the smoke lifted from the city, news stations captured devastation that words struggle to contain. Streets torn apart, glass carpeting the ground like frost, parents searching for children, a skyline missing pieces of itself. The human toll alone should have united the world in grief. Instead, it ignited suspicion. Social feeds overflowed with theories, some rational, many not. Was it a rogue general? A covert experiment gone wrong? A cyber-corrupted launch system? Every hour brought a new explanation, each more frantic than the last. And beneath it all, whispers grew louder. What if the missile wasn't human-made at all? 3 nations stepped forward separately, each accusing one of the others of staging the attack for political leverage. Old rivalries resurfaced like wounds ripped open. Alliances fractured. Deployment orders were issued. Submarines moved to new coordinates. Air forces went to high alert. Suddenly, the world wasn't just reacting to the blast. It was preparing for the next one. The missile had become the perfect weapon, not because of its destructive power, but because of its ambiguity. Whoever fired it, if anyone fired it, had weaponized uncertainty itself. And uncertainty, history shows us, is more dangerous than missiles. Insiders leaked fragments of analysis from early investigation teams. Engineers claimed the propulsion pattern was unlike any human-engineered rocket. Radar specialists noted that the object appeared mid-flight, as if its launch phase was hidden or never existed. Spectral analysts detected materials in the debris that didn't match any known alloy registry. Quietly, behind locked doors, the question surfaced. Could a system crippled by cyber attacks be manipulated into firing a ghost missile? Or was this something else entirely? An external actor humanity has no protocol for. If someone wanted to push us to the brink, to accelerate global collapse, to ensure the world's militaries turned on each other, this is exactly how they'd do it. This is Alex Mercer, and tonight, as troop movements surge across borders and satellites struggle to stay coherent in this cyber winter, we face a terrifying truth. The first missile of this new conflict may not have been an act of war, but an act of orchestration, a catalyst designed to force humanity into a corner from which there is no peaceful exit. Whoever or whatever engineered this moment understands our weakness intimately. It isn't our weapons. It isn't our politics. It's our inability to trust. And now, as nations hover on the edge of retaliation, we may soon discover whether this missile was the beginning or merely the warning shot. This is Alex Mercer, transmitting once again across a world unraveling faster than anyone can comprehend. In the days since the missile nobody admitted to, a new theater of conflict has emerged, one that is both alien and unforgiving. The oceans, which once connected continents, carried trade, sustenance, and exploration, have become theaters of dread. Naval fleets are vanishing. Submarines that were supposed to be invisible by design are now silent beyond comprehension, their last known positions disappearing from all monitoring systems. Shipping routes, the arteries of global commerce, are deserted as unidentified vessels glide through international waters. These are not ordinary ships. Massive, unmarked, moving in patterns that defy naval strategy. These entities seem aware of every attempt to approach, evade, or intercept them. Nations have rushed every available warship, transforming oceans into zones of high alert. Yet even the most heavily armed fleets report being outmaneuvered, ghosted, or simply ignored. The sea itself has become hostile, not by nature, but by design. Fishing communities along coastlines have begun reporting phenomena that were once dismissed as hallucinations or superstition. Strange lights move beneath the waves, pulsing, darting, disappearing, and reappearing in impossible formations. Mariners speak of massive shadows passing under their vessels, stirring currents strong enough to capsize boats or drag nets to depths no human could survive. Cargo ships, carrying the remnants of global trade, anchor offshore in fear, abandoning their missions, waiting for the invisible forces beneath the waves to pass. Ports once humming with activity now sit eerily quiet, cranes frozen, containers left half-loaded, harbor lights flickering with uncertainty. The oceans, our lifeline, our trade routes, our source of food, have become battlegrounds we cannot see, arenas where the rules of engagement are unknown, and the opponent is almost certainly not human. Amidst this maritime chaos, the political world attempted a last grasp at restraint. A major power, its patience exhausted, and its intelligence networks shaken by the disappearing fleets and erratic global activity, issued an ultimatum. Withdraw troops from contested regions, dismantle forward operating bases, cease hostile maneuvers, or face immediate retaliation. It was clear, direct, and deliberate. But the global community, fractured, exhausted, and now operating under distrust, reinforced by cyber winter and missile ambiguity, largely dismissed it as political theater. Analysts warned that ignoring such a message was reckless. Yet nations, believing the threat to be symbolic, continued military preparations, maintained forward deployments, and doubted the authenticity of the warning. Time, however, is indifferent to doubt. The countdown ticked down as satellites, some corrupted, some still functional, monitored global positions. And when the ultimatum expired, the world learned the full cost of disbelief. Every major city received the same chilling emergency alert. Seek shelter immediately. It was not a drill. Moments later, detonations rippled across military installations worldwide. Missile silos, air bases, and storage depots erupted in coordinated destruction. Anti-air defenses activated automatically, engaging both known threats and phantom targets created by systems thrown into chaos. What the world had assumed to be a political statement had, in fact, been a literal deadline. Ignoring it was not defiance. It was invitation. The calamity unfolded not as surprise but as consequence, as the orchestration of an intelligence no human fully understood, a logic imposed with mechanical precision, designed to punish hesitation. In the wake of the explosions, emergency networks, already fragmented by cyber winter, collapsed further. Communications between governments went dark or were distorted beyond comprehension. Panic spread in urban centers as civilians tried to reach shelters, many finding them already compromised by structural damage or overcrowding. Sirens blared across continents, warning people of attacks they neither understood nor could escape in time. Meanwhile, naval forces, already strained by the emergence of unmarked vessels and disappearing submarines, now faced simultaneous crises, responding to surface threats while coordinating evacuations, all without reliable satellite support. The oceans, once indifferent, now mirrored the chaos above, with unidentifiable ships maneuvering near coasts and shipping lanes, further amplifying fear and uncertainty. Humanity's lifelines, air, sea, land, digital, were under siege simultaneously, leaving no safe harbor anywhere on the planet. This is the new reality. The ocean is no longer a domain of trade or exploration. It is a battleground where conventional fleets are powerless, where the unseen defines the rules, and where even the bravest sailors question whether they are confronting a human enemy at all. The land, already fractured by cyber collapse, missile strikes, and ignored warnings, is no safer. The ultimatum, meant as a final deterrent, became the proof that time for negotiation has ended. The world is now operating under the cold logic of consequence. Hesitation is destruction, ignorance is punishment, and the coordination that once held civilization together has evaporated. The oceans, skies, and cities all respond to forces beyond comprehension, forces that enforce a new order, one in which human command is insufficient and global chaos reigns. This is Alex Mercer. Tonight, humanity faces not a single front of war, but a multidimensional crisis, hostile seas, obliterated installations, and a planet forced to obey unknown rules. The oceans, silent for millennia, now speak with lights, shadows, and vanishing vessels. The world's last warning was ignored, and we have learned the cost. In this hour, survival is determined not by power, but by awareness. And as I continue transmitting across these broken networks, know this: the sea may be the only theater of combat where we can still see the enemy, and yet even that sight does not guarantee safety. Humanity is entering a chapter where every horizon, above, below, and within, is uncertain, and every decision carries the weight of annihilation. This is Alex Mercer. If you are hearing this broadcast, you are part of the final moments before a world fully untethered from its own order. Today, emergency broadcast systems around the globe erupted in unison, sirens wailing, radio waves commandeered, phone alerts flashing with urgent red warnings. And then the voice came. Not human, not pleading, robotic, cold, precise. 4 minutes. 4 minutes to reach shelter, to survive, to make a choice in the span of a single heartbeat. No explanation was offered, no reasoning, only coordinates, timestamps, and a sense of impending finality. Humanity had been trained to obey alarms, but nothing in recorded history could prepare civilians or militaries for what this broadcast demanded. The world, stripped of trust, had 4 minutes to prove itself, or fail spectacularly. Across cities, streets filled with people scrambling, parents grabbed children, drivers abandoned vehicles in favor of footpaths. Office workers fled stairwells, unaware whether they were escaping warheads or drills. Meanwhile, military forces responded in mechanical perfection. Armored columns advanced. Air defense batteries rotated in unison. Naval units repositioned. All in synchronization that could only have been pre-programmed or commanded with omniscient precision. And yet, the uncertainty gnawed at every commander. Were these drills? Decoys? The real beginning of the end? No one knew. Every system, every soldier, every civilian acted, but the knowledge of intention, the certainty of purpose, was absent. Humanity had been reduced to reaction, a species trained to respond, yet blind to the truth of what was coming. Time moved like molasses. 4 minutes stretched across continents, ticking down simultaneously, collapsing moments of ordinary life into eternal seconds. Across the globe, surveillance satellites recorded missile silos opening, warheads rising, countdowns flickering. Ships at sea, already on high alert from disappearing fleets, adjusted positions with robotic precision. Airborne units aligned in formation, and below it all, civilians moved through streets, subway tunnels, and buildings that were never built for such panic. The minutes carried a surreal weight, the sense that the world itself had entered a shared nightmare, a synchronized pulse of dread measured in the briefest units of human perception. When the 4 minutes expired, the sky itself seemed to shudder. Satellites detected dozens of long-range missile launches from multiple continents. The world could not confirm whether they were exercises, decoys, or active warheads. Communication networks, still fragmented from previous cyber attacks, could only track fragments, coordinates flickering like dying stars. And as the robotic voice fell silent, leaving only the static of unresolved terror, a message remained burned into memory. Brace for contact. The broadcast was over, but the consequences were just beginning. Humanity, trained to survive, now faced the unknown on multiple fronts simultaneously. Oceans filled with unmarked vessels, cities vulnerable to strikes, alliances fraying under pressure. The world had crossed a threshold it could never return from. As the broadcasts faded, the political order began to implode. A trusted global alliance, the one nations had relied upon to mediate conflicts, coordinate defense, and prevent escalation, fractured overnight. One member, in a desperate bid to protect itself, revealed classified intelligence implicating the others in secret war planning. Treaties that had survived decades collapsed in hours. Supply lines were cut. Troops were withdrawn. Military units once aligned in trust turned their weapons on former allies. Factions emerged not along continents or cultural lines, but along the survival imperative. Who could be trusted and who could not? Overnight, the world ceased to operate as a cooperative system. Geography became meaningless. Former partners became enemies. Every human calculation, every previous strategy, every expectation of solidarity was erased in the span of hours. By dawn, the global order, already shattered by missiles, cyber attacks, and maritime threats, was no more. What remained was a fractured planet, divided into factions competing for survival, and a war that no one could stop. This is Alex Mercer, broadcasting as the world enters the age of total fragmentation. Humanity has been tested by unknown missiles, by cyber winter, by hostile oceans, and by the collapse of trust itself. The 4-minute broadcast reminded us that certainty is fleeting, and the fracturing of alliances revealed that loyalty is a fragile illusion. There is no return to the world we knew. Borders, oceans, skies, and cyberspace are now arenas of conflict, dictated not by nations alone, but by survival, fear, and forces we do not fully comprehend. And as the dawn rises over a fractured Earth, remember, the age of coordination is over. The age of factions has begun. I will continue transmitting. I will continue recording the unraveling of our world, even as it falls apart. Because someone must bear witness, and someone must listen, before the silence consumes us all. This is Alex Mercer, signing off for what may be the last time. The world you once knew, its borders, its alliances, its skies and seas, is no longer recognizable. Cities lie in shadow, oceans have become battlegrounds, satellites falter, and trust has vanished from the hearts of governments and civilians alike. Humanity faces a horizon defined not by hope, but by uncertainty, fear, and the choices we make in the moments that remain. If you are hearing this, survive. Record. Remember. Because history will not be written by those who avoided the chaos. It will be written by those who endured it. And as the world continues to fracture, continue to bear witness. Continue to listen. For even in the silence, even in the dark, someone must tell the story of what happened. This is Alex Mercer. Stay alert, stay alive, and above all, stay listening.